Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in her military training unit. At 22, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with calloused hands that spoke of years working in her family's auto repair shop before enlisting. The other recruits towered over her, their voices booming across the barracks while hers remained soft and measured. She had joined the Army not for glory or adventure, but out of necessity. Her younger brother needed surgery. Her mother worked 3 jobs just to pay rent, and the military offered the financial stability her family desperately needed. The training facility in Georgia felt like another planet compared to her small hometown in Nevada. Everything here moved at double speed. Drill sergeants shouted orders before sunrise. Recruits stumbled through obstacle courses in the scorching heat, and exhaustion became a constant companion. Sarah struggled from day one. While her fellow trainees seemed to adapt quickly to the physical demands, she found herself gasping for air during morning runs and trembling under the weight of her equipment during field exercises. Sergeant Williams, their head instructor, was a mountain of a man with 30 years of service etched into the lines around his eyes. He noticed everything and forgot nothing. Sarah could feel his gaze following her during training sessions, watching as she fell behind during marches and needed extra time to complete physical challenges. She knew he was evaluating her, measuring her worth against military standards that seemed impossibly high. The real test came during the 3rd week of basic training. The obstacle course that morning was more challenging than anything they had faced before. Rope climbs stretched 30 feet into the air, mud pits waited to swallow anyone who lost their footing, and barbed wire crawls demanded perfect form to avoid injury. Sarah watched her teammates tackle each obstacle with growing confidence, while her own stomach churned with anxiety. When her turn came, she approached the first obstacle with sweaty palms. The wall climb required upper body strength she simply did not possess. She made it halfway up before her arms gave out, sending her tumbling back to the ground. Laughter erupted from some of the other recruits. Her face burned with embarrassment as she picked herself up and tried again. This time she made it 3/4 of the way before falling. Sergeant Williams appeared beside her, his expression unreadable. He did not offer encouragement or criticism, just pointed to the starting line and said one word, "Again." Sarah's legs felt like jelly, but she obeyed. On her 3rd attempt, she finally made it over the wall, though her arms shook so violently she could barely hold on. The rope climb proved even more challenging. Sarah had never been good at climbing, and the thick rope felt impossible to grip properly. She watched other recruits scale the rope like it was a ladder while she struggled to lift herself even a few feet off the ground. Her hands burned from the rough fiber, and her shoulders screamed in protest. Each attempt ended with her sliding back down, rope burns marking her palms. By the time she reached the mud crawl, Sarah was already behind schedule. The other recruits had finished and stood watching her struggle through each obstacle. The barbed wire hung low over the mud pit, forcing crawlers to stay flat on their bellies while pulling themselves forward with their elbows. Sarah had barely started when she felt the wire catch her uniform. Panic set in as she realized she was stuck. Sergeant Williams knelt beside the wire. Instead of helping her immediately, he spoke in a calm voice that only she could hear. He told her that the Army was not about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about finding strength when strength seemed impossible, about pushing forward when every instinct screamed to quit. His words penetrated through her fear and frustration. Sarah took a deep breath and carefully worked herself free from the wire. She continued crawling through the mud, inch by painful inch, while the other recruits waited at the finish line. Her uniform was caked with mud. Her body ached from head to toe, and her pride lay in tatters. But she kept moving forward. When she finally emerged from under the last strand of wire, no one cheered. The other recruits looked at her with a mixture of pity and impatience. Sarah felt smaller than ever as she stood there dripping mud and breathing heavily. She had finished last again. She had struggled with every obstacle while others made it look easy. She had embarrassed herself in front of everyone. That evening in the barracks, Sarah sat on her bunk and stared at her reflection in her small mirror. Her face was streaked with dirt, her hair hung in sweaty tangles, and her eyes showed the exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. She pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to her mother, telling her about the training and how difficult everything had become. As she wrote, tears began falling onto the paper. She found herself admitting things she had never said out loud. She wrote about feeling inadequate, about wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by enlisting. She wrote about watching other recruits succeed where she failed and feeling like she was holding everyone back. The letter became longer and more emotional as she poured out her frustrations and fears. But she never sent that letter. Instead, she folded it carefully and placed it under her pillow. Something inside her refused to admit defeat, even to herself. She thought about her brother's medical bills and her mother's tired face after long days at work. She thought about the promises she had made to her family and to herself when she enlisted. The next morning brought new challenges, and Sarah faced them with the same determination that had carried her through the obstacle course. She still struggled, still finished last in most exercises, and still felt the weight of others' expectations pressing down on her. But something had changed during that night of honest reflection. She began to understand that her journey would be different from everyone else's. During weapons training, Sarah discovered she had exceptional focus and steady hands. While other recruits struggled to hit targets consistently, she found a natural rhythm with a rifle. Her shots grouped tightly around the bullseye, earning nods of approval from the instructors. For the first time since arriving at the facility, she felt capable and confident. The discovery that she excelled in marksmanship began to shift how others saw her. Recruits who had dismissed her as weak started asking for her advice about shooting techniques. Instructors took notice of her scores and began pushing her harder in other areas. Sarah realized that strength came in many forms and that she had been judging herself by standards that did not account for her unique abilities. Physical training remained a challenge, but Sarah approached it differently now. Instead of comparing herself to others, she focused on improving her own performance day by day. She developed strategies for tackling obstacles that played to her strengths rather than highlighting her weaknesses. She learned to use momentum and technique where others relied on raw power. The transformation was gradual, but unmistakable. Sarah's confidence grew with each small victory, and her determination deepened with each setback she overcame. She began helping other recruits who struggled in areas where she had found success, creating bonds that went beyond simple friendship. The unit started working together more effectively as everyone recognized that different people brought different strengths to the team. Sergeant Williams watched Sarah's evolution with careful attention. He had seen many recruits come and go over his long career, and he recognized something special in her persistence and growth. She reminded him of his own early struggles in the military and the mentors who had helped him discover his potential. He began to see in Sarah the qualities that made exceptional soldiers: resilience, adaptability, and an unshakable commitment to improvement. As the weeks passed, Sarah continued to face challenges that pushed her beyond what she thought possible. But each challenge also revealed new depths of strength and capability she never knew she possessed. The quiet girl from Nevada was discovering that she had the heart of a warrior, even if her journey to that discovery looked different from everyone else's path. 6 months into her service, Sarah found herself stationed at a remote outpost in Afghanistan. The landscape stretched endlessly in shades of brown and gold, dotted with rocky outcroppings that provided cover for both friend and foe. The base itself was a collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Everything here operated under the constant awareness that danger could emerge from any direction at any moment. Sarah had been assigned to a reconnaissance unit under the command of Lieutenant Harris, a career officer known for his tactical expertise and demanding standards. Her role as a designated marksman meant she often found herself in positions requiring both technical skill and split-second decision-making. The quiet confidence she had developed during training now served her well in the field, where patience and precision could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The unit consisted of 8 soldiers, each with specialized skills that complemented the others. Sarah had earned their respect through consistent performance and unwavering reliability. When they needed accurate covering fire, she delivered. When they required surveillance from elevated positions, she maintained watch for hours without complaint. Her small stature, once seen as a disadvantage, now proved valuable for reaching positions that larger soldiers could not access. The day that would test everything Sarah had learned began like any other. Intelligence reports indicated increased activity in a valley 20 kilometers from their base. Local informants had spotted unusual vehicle movements and suspected weapons transfers. Lieutenant Harris received orders to conduct a reconnaissance mission to gather information and assess the threat level. Sarah prepared her equipment with a methodical care that had become second nature. Her rifle was cleaned and zeroed, her scope adjusted for the expected distances. She checked her communications gear, medical supplies, and emergency rations. Every item had its place and purpose, and she had learned that attention to these details could prove crucial when situations deteriorated rapidly. The mission began before dawn, with the unit moving in 2 vehicles across terrain that challenged both man and machine. Sarah rode in the second vehicle, scanning the horizon through her scope while monitoring radio communications. The landscape appeared empty, but she had learned not to trust appearances in this place, where threats could materialize without warning. They established an observation post on a ridge overlooking the target valley. Sarah positioned herself among rocks that provided both concealment and a clear field of fire. Through her scope, she could see the village below and the roads leading into it. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but something felt wrong. The streets seemed too empty, the normal patterns of daily life absent. Lieutenant Harris made the decision to move closer for better observation. He selected Sarah and 2 other soldiers to accompany him while the rest of the unit maintained overwatch from the ridge. They approached the village using a wadi that provided cover, but also limited their escape routes. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of tension and focus that came with high-risk operations. As they moved through the dry riverbed, Sarah noticed fresh tire tracks in the sand. The patterns were wrong for local vehicles, suggesting the presence of outside elements. She reported her observation to Lieutenant Harris, who acknowledged the information but continued the approach. The mission requirements demanded closer reconnaissance, despite the increased risk. They reached a position within 200 meters of the village when everything changed. The quiet morning erupted in gunfire as positions they had not detected opened fire simultaneously. The attack was coordinated and well-planned, suggesting their movements had been monitored and anticipated. Lieutenant Harris immediately called for withdrawal, but enemy fire blocked their direct route back to the wadi. Sarah found herself separated from the others when they scattered for cover. She had taken position behind a large boulder that provided protection from most directions, but left her isolated from her team. Radio chatter filled her earpiece with urgent communications about casualties and ammunition status. She could hear Lieutenant Harris trying to coordinate their withdrawal while under heavy fire. Through her scope, Sarah began identifying enemy positions. Her training took over as she methodically engaged targets, providing covering fire that allowed her teammates to move between cover positions. Each shot had to count, as her ammunition was limited and resupply impossible under current conditions. She forced herself to breathe steadily and squeeze the trigger smoothly despite the chaos around her. The situation deteriorated when she heard Lieutenant Harris report that he was wounded and unable to move effectively. One of the other soldiers had taken shrapnel to his leg and was also immobilized. The remaining member of their team was running low on ammunition and could not reach the injured men without exposing himself to concentrated enemy fire. Sarah realized that someone needed to take charge and coordinate their extraction. Leadership had never been something she sought or felt comfortable with, but the circumstances left no alternative. She began directing the uninjured soldier to cover positions while she worked to suppress enemy fire from her isolated position. Using her radio, Sarah contacted the Overwatch team on the ridge. She provided detailed information about enemy positions and requested specific types of supporting fire. Her calm voice and precise coordinates helped the distant team engage targets they could not clearly see from their position. The suppressive fire created brief windows of opportunity for movement. Sarah made the decision to leave her protected position and move toward her wounded teammates. The action went against every instinct for self-preservation, but she could see no other way to achieve the mission requirement of bringing everyone home alive. She moved in short bursts between cover positions, drawing enemy fire, but using her knowledge of their positions to avoid the most dangerous areas. She reached Lieutenant Harris first and quickly assessed his condition. He had taken a round through the shoulder and was losing blood steadily. His face was pale, but his eyes remained alert and focused. He tried to protest when Sarah began preparing to move him, insisting that she should save herself rather than risk additional casualties. Sarah ignored his protests and activated a smoke grenade to provide concealment. Under cover of the purple smoke, she began dragging the lieutenant toward a position where the other injured soldier was taking cover. The physical effort required every bit of strength she possessed, but she had learned during training that determination could overcome apparent limitations. The enemy continued firing into the smoke, forcing Sarah to move carefully to avoid exposing herself or the lieutenant to random shots. She could hear bullets impacting the ground around them and feel rock fragments kicked up by near misses. Terror threatened to overwhelm her, but she channeled it into sharper focus and quicker movement. When she reached the other wounded soldier, Sarah found him conscious but unable to walk on his injured leg. Now she faced the challenge of moving two injured men while maintaining defensive fire against an unknown number of enemies. The mathematics of the situation appeared impossible, but Sarah had learned that impossible was often just another word for difficult. She positioned both wounded soldiers in the best available cover and began calling for extraction support from the base. The radio conversation revealed that helicopter support would not be available for at least 30 minutes due to weather conditions. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours given their current situation and the ammunition they had remaining. Sarah took inventory of their resources and developed a plan that maximized their defensive capabilities while conserving ammunition. She assigned fields of fire to each person who could still shoot and established signals for coordinated movement. Her voice remained steady as she explained the plan, projecting confidence she did not entirely feel. The plan required Sarah to move again, this time to a position that would allow her to engage enemy forces from an unexpected angle. The movement would be dangerous and would leave the wounded soldiers with reduced protection, but it offered their best chance for survival until help arrived. As she prepared to leave the relative safety of their position, Lieutenant Harris grabbed her arm. Despite his pain and blood loss, his grip was firm and his eyes clear. He told her that she had already done more than anyone could expect and that she should not risk everything on a desperate gamble. His words carried the authority of rank and experience. Sarah looked at her wounded lieutenant and injured teammate, then at the empty landscape that offered no easy answers or comfortable choices. She thought about the family that was depending on her to come home safely, but she also thought about the promises soldiers make to each other. In that moment, she understood that some decisions define who a person really is, regardless of rank, size, or background. Sarah squeezed Lieutenant Harris's hand briefly before pulling away. She had made her decision, and no amount of well-intentioned advice would change her mind. Moving low and fast, she sprinted toward the position she had identified through her scope. Enemy fire erupted around her, but her small size and erratic movement pattern made her a difficult target to track. She reached a new position breathing hard but uninjured. From this angle, she could see enemy fighters who had remained hidden from her previous location. They were positioned in a defensive line that had effectively pinned down her team, but their focus on the original firefight had left them exposed to attack from her current position. Sarah began engaging targets with careful precision. Each shot was aimed to maximize disruption of the enemy formation while conserving her limited ammunition. She watched through her scope as confusion spread through the enemy ranks when they realized they were being attacked from multiple directions. Some fighters began repositioning to address the new threat, which reduced pressure on her wounded teammates. The tactical situation shifted in their favor as Sarah continued her methodical engagement of enemy positions. Her accurate fire forced several fighters to abandon their positions entirely, while others became focused on locating and suppressing her rather than maintaining their siege of the wounded soldiers. The coordination that had made the enemy attack so effective began breaking down under pressure from an unexpected direction. Radio communications brought news that extraction helicopters were finally airborne and approaching their position. Sarah provided updates on the tactical situation and marked enemy positions with smoke for the incoming aircraft. The sound of rotor blades in the distance was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. The helicopter pilots coordinated with ground forces to establish a secure landing zone. Sarah maintained suppressive fire while medical personnel evacuated the wounded soldiers. Lieutenant Harris was conscious during his evacuation and maintained eye contact with Sarah until he disappeared into the aircraft. The look of respect and gratitude in his eyes would remain with her forever. With the wounded evacuated, Sarah and the remaining soldier fought their way to the extraction point under cover of helicopter gun runs. The enemy forces retreated rather than face the superior firepower of the aircraft, allowing the ground team to reach safety. As Sarah climbed aboard the helicopter, she felt the tension of the past several hours finally beginning to ease. The flight back to base gave Sarah time to process what had happened. She had led a successful extraction under impossible circumstances, saving the lives of her teammates through decisions that required courage beyond anything she had previously imagined. The quiet girl who had struggled through basic training had become a leader when leadership was desperately needed. At the base hospital, Sarah visited Lieutenant Harris as he recovered from surgery. His shoulder would heal completely, but he would be returning to the United States for extended rehabilitation. He thanked Sarah for her actions and told her that she had displayed the finest qualities of military leadership under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. News of the successful extraction reached higher command levels within days. The operation had demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical thinking under pressure. Sarah found herself called to meetings with senior officers who wanted to understand exactly how the rescue had been accomplished. Her detailed reports and honest assessment of the situation impressed everyone who read them. Colonel Patricia Morrison, the base commander, requested a personal meeting with Sarah. Colonel Morrison was a legend in military circles, having served multiple combat tours and risen through the ranks despite barriers that had blocked many women from advancement. She was known for her direct communication style and uncompromising standards for excellence. The meeting took place in Colonel Morrison's office, a Spartan space decorated only with maps, unit insignia, and photographs of soldiers she had served with over the years. Sarah entered nervously, unsure what to expect from this encounter with one of the most respected officers in the military. Colonel Morrison began the conversation by reviewing the details of the extraction mission. She had read all the reports and spoken with the other soldiers involved, including Lieutenant Harris. Her questions were specific and challenging, probing Sarah's decision-making process and tactical reasoning. Sarah answered honestly, explaining her thought process without attempting to minimize the risks she had taken. As the conversation continued, Sarah realized that Colonel Morrison was not interrogating her about the mission, but rather trying to understand her potential for future leadership roles. The colonel spoke about the qualities that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones, and the importance of developing leaders who could think clearly under pressure. Colonel Morrison revealed that Sarah was being considered for several opportunities that would advance her military career significantly. These positions would require additional training and education, but they would also place her on a path toward greater responsibility and leadership roles. The recognition was far beyond anything Sarah had imagined when she first enlisted. The conversation turned to Sarah's long-term goals and aspirations. Sarah spoke honestly about her initial motivation for joining the military and how her perspective had evolved through training and combat experience. She explained that she had discovered abilities and interests she never knew she possessed and wanted to continue developing them in service to her country. Colonel Morrison listened carefully to Sarah's responses before making an offer that would change her life trajectory completely. She recommended Sarah for Officer Candidate School, a program that would transform her from an enlisted soldier into a commissioned officer. The recommendation carried significant weight given Colonel Morrison's reputation and would virtually guarantee acceptance into the competitive program. Sarah was stunned by the offer. Officer Candidate School represented opportunities she had never considered possible when she first enlisted. The program would provide education, training, and career advancement far beyond her original expectations. It would also mean additional years of military service and greater responsibilities than she had ever imagined carrying. The decision required careful consideration of her personal goals and family obligations. The financial benefits of an officer's career would certainly help her family, but the time commitments would mean extended separation from the people she loved. Sarah asked for time to consider the offer and discuss it with her family before making such a significant decision. Colonel Morrison agreed to give Sarah 2 weeks to reach her decision. She emphasized that such opportunities were rare and that Sarah's demonstrated capabilities made her an ideal candidate for military leadership. The colonel also mentioned that the military was actively seeking officers with combat experience and proven decision-making abilities under pressure. During her leave period, Sarah returned home to Nevada for the first time since completing basic training. Her family barely recognized the confident, capable woman who had replaced the uncertain girl who had left months earlier. Her mother noticed immediately that Sarah carried herself differently and spoke with authority that had not existed before. Sarah explained the offer from Colonel Morrison and the opportunities it represented. Her family was proud of her accomplishments, but concerned about the additional risks and time commitments involved in an officer's career. Her brother, whose surgery had been successful thanks to Sarah's military benefits, encouraged her to pursue whatever path would make her happiest. The decision ultimately came down to Sarah's understanding of her own capabilities and desires. The frightened recruit who had struggled through obstacle courses seemed like a different person now. She had discovered that she possessed courage, leadership ability, and tactical intelligence that could serve her country in ways she had never imagined. Sarah returned to base with her decision made. She accepted Colonel Morrison's recommendation for Officer Candidate School and committed to the additional years of service it required. The colonel smiled when Sarah announced her choice and said she had expected nothing less from someone who had risked everything to save her teammates. The formal ceremony recognizing Sarah's actions during the extraction mission took place the following week. She received a Bronze Star Medal for valor and was promoted to sergeant ahead of the normal timeline. The recognition meant less to her than the knowledge that her teammates had survived because of decisions she made under impossible circumstances. As Sarah prepared for Officer Candidate School, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The girl who had written tearful letters home during basic training had become a leader capable of making life and death decisions under pressure. She had been forced past every limit she thought existed and had discovered that those limits were largely self-imposed. Colonel Morrison's final advice to Sarah was simple but profound. She told her that true leadership was not about being the strongest or smartest person in the room, but about finding strength when strength seemed impossible and helping others discover their own capabilities. Sarah carried those words with her as she embarked on the next phase of her military career. Years later, when Sarah had become an officer herself and was training new recruits, she would remember her own struggles and fears during those early days. She understood that everyone's path to discovering their capabilities looked different, and that the quiet ones often possessed the deepest wells of courage and determination. The small-town girl who had joined the military to help her family had found a calling that went far beyond financial necessity. She had learned that service to others could reveal strengths she never knew she possessed, and that pushing past apparent limitations was often just the beginning of discovering what was truly possible. Her achievement had resonated not just with Colonel Morrison, but with everyone who understood that heroism often came in unexpected packages and that the greatest leaders were often forged in the hottest fires of adversity.